Testing, testing.
Testing, testing.
I don't know if it's turned on. Okay. All right, Regina, is the sound system turned on?
I'm working on it.
Okay.
As long as I stay on moment.
So yes, it's one of the
Yes, people from nasty things like send me an invitation to my return. Which I mean they had to be right. Right every day. It was like even.
I almost went with the office. I was very confused. So Michigan had
Testing. Testing, testing. Testing, testing.
A lot of people said that was that. There's also there's a group of attorneys and teachers who are that'd be another option, but if you're out of town, yeah, it's like 5,000 less. That's the problem. It's 60 of those are in the summer presentation. Let's pick them up. And I know they'll fuss with them. And then the plague in people to return. The only place in
I'm sort of thinking creating a picture.
I signed up for Babel
In my correspondence with this woman, somebody wrote a post on Facebook and they had taken a class with her. And we got to this great library called Gilmore, and I went, oh. So I went to Gilmore. It's close to the Red Sox, it's about 4 minutes from the Red Sox. And it's owned since the 90s by the family that makes Ferragamo cheese. And they have an art gallery. They have an art gallery and they have libraries. And we're going to go. It's going to be fun. It'll be great. Oh, yeah. I'll eat some pasta.
Cities
allows us to love her. She does. She said,
I was in Israel.
she said, oh, my, I just love her. You have to go better. We lost our daughter back in October.
Pardon me? Have I met students? Don't see what they are. And over was in this Hebrew University. We were together. But then we decided, okay, we're not going to go to Israel. That's what it
Our dog died.
She keeps on reminding me. That's the truth, yeah.
Good evening, everybody. When the shooting happened at Chabad of Poway on Saturday, and Rabbi Nadav Kane and I began talking and reaching out to other rabbinic colleagues, we were unsure whether or not we would have a gathering, a vigil of some sort, and thankfully Chabad here, Rabbi Goldstein of Ann Arbor, took it upon himself with his family to create a gathering at Chabad last night. I imagine, I know, not just imagine, I know some of you were there. Before I knew about that and before I wrote the words that I wrote for last night, I had also begun writing a prayer and had spoken with members of generations after to offer just a few words before we begin this formal Yom HaShoah service, a prayer for not only Chabad of Poway, but all of us. Makor Chaim, a source of life, pain and anguish pulse through the Jewish community again. Hatred and violence have ripped through us. Gunshots ring out. Brothers and sisters observe a final day of Pesach. Our lives still embittered by anti-Semitism. Sightlines focused on our hearts. The bread of affliction gives way. It should have been joy purifying the chametz in our souls, Israel is with one less. Affliction of spirit, affliction of soul. Makor Chaim, O source of life, help us to heal, help us to teach ourselves, our country, to seek life, to grow communities of hope, weaving tapestries of love from threads of despair. Every generation past has come out around us, not tighten its grip. Please, God, may the narrowness we feel now open into.
We welcome you tonight as we observe Yom HaShoah v'Hagavura. Zachor, remember. We are here tonight because we are compelled to speak of the Shoah. We must remember, the world must never forget, the 6 million Jews and millions of others murdered in World War II. We also honor and remember those who survived, who suffered and lost so much, but who somehow were able to continue living to give us life. It is our honor to speak here tonight and our obligation. Unraveling our family's past has meant dealing with stories of sorrow, horror, and heartbreak, of families torn apart by war and children separated from parents. We will relate some of these stories to you tonight. They must never be forgotten. In our past services here at Temple Beth Emeth, we have usually ended our parents' history with their arrival in America, often after having dealt with strict immigration quotas. We have talked of their courage, resilience, and determination to carry on. We have related vague anecdotes of their struggles in the New World, but we have mostly glossed over many harsh realities that were too painful to discuss, even among ourselves. In recent meetings of our Generations After group, we have talked about how difficult it was growing up as part of an immigrant family that experienced severe trauma. When asked who among us had parents who suffered from periods of major depression, every hand went up. When we were children, PTSD was not a recognized diagnosis. Our parents were told not to tell their stories, to forget the war, and move on to life in America. But life as an immigrant was extremely difficult. Our parents dealt with continued persecution, struggles to find work, financial strains, and the search for acceptance in a society that viewed them as different, a society that called them greenhorns or worse. In light of the way many immigrants in the world, in our own society, are being treated today, we have come to realize this continuing part of our parents' stories must be told. We are compelled to speak. We have often described our Generations After family as many threads woven together into a beautiful cloth. As we discussed the challenges our parents faced as immigrants, we found a common thread with what is going on in the world today. As much as we wish the world would become a better place, there are still displaced people seeking refuge from horribly violent situations, from hunger and poverty, from persecution and intolerance. Immigrants who merely seek a chance at freedom still face many of the same challenges our parents did, but aren't even given a chance to try. And this week, we are once again faced with the horror of a vicious and deadly attack on a synagogue, this time in Southern California. We are aware of the dangers of making facile comparisons between the Holocaust and the events of the present day. But we in Generations After were raised to be alert to the warning signs of the world's moral failure. We are exquisitely tuned in to the echoes of the Shoah. We recognize that what is happening in the world right now has happened before. It is an early warning sign of what could happen again, and so we are compelled to speak.
It is estimated that in addition to the 6 million Jewish victims of the Shoah, another 6 to 11 million souls perished in the hands of the Nazis. Tonight, we light 6 yahrzeit candles for the 6 million Jews and 6 additional candles for the millions of others whom the Nazi deemed unworthy of life and therefore targeted for extermination. We call on members of Generation After for the lighting of the memorial candles. We read together, "We kindle these lights in memory of the 6 million Jews and unknown millions of others murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators. May the memory of the righteous be for blessing." Sakram.
We read responsively, "Blessed is the match" by Hannah Senish. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Blessed is the match that burns in the secret fastness of the heart. Blessed is the heart with the strength to stop its beating for honor's sake. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame.
Amen.
This is Anniversaries by Alona Carmel. In my house, no morning candles will ever glisten. Too many would have to burn, millions. Then days of anniversaries would follow. Too many to honor the lost ones. It would take forever. In my house, no morning candles will ever glisten. I tell you, there's not even enough time to light them. My whole life is already a prolonged day of mourning. Each minute is spent in grief. What would I do with little teardrop candles when my heart is like a furnace that burned up my happiness with the others?
Even before my mother and aunt arrived in the U.S., a group of survivors in New York published the first edition of their wartime poems, including the one that Sarah just read. They wrote to them in Stockholm requesting that they write an introduction to the volume. This is an excerpt. These poems are inscriptions on a prison wall. They are feeble efforts to preserve a record. Why make such an effort to leave behind a trace and to transmit one's experience before it's all over? What forced us to do this? Was it the pain, or was it a protest against the absolute end of things? No. Having been taught by machine guns to think in categories of thousands and millions, we had reconciled ourselves to the unimportance of the individual. Did we write in order to transmit information and thereby incite people to later vengeance? No. In those days, we understood the complete futility of trying to match any punishment to this crime. And yet we did write for people in the future as an act of self-defense. We wanted others to discover in our suffering a meaning and a purpose, to ensure that millions did not die in vain as long as our experience was used as a warning to future generations. These poems and thousands of other creations form one cry only: remember. We read together. We carry with us all the fragments of our people's past, the broken lives, the anguished deaths, for we refuse to let their deaths be in vain. They, our past, live on in us as we continue the Jewish journey to the future, to hope, and to life.
This is the Shoah testimony of my mother, Frankie Glevich, and her sister, my Aunt Lola Schwartz. They liquidated the Lodz ghetto August of 1944. They told us to take all of our clothes with us because we were going to a work camp. We were loaded into train cars to Auschwitz. I remember how my mother dressed that day in a silk blouse, navy, red, and yellow suit. She was always so neat. She was wearing high heels. She always wore high heels. The train ride, it was horrible. We were packed, men and women together. There was one pail. I can't remember how many days we were on that train, 3, 4, 5, without food or water. We were very naive. We couldn't believe the rumors that some people who left never came back. We thought the Germans needed us for work. We thought they wouldn't kill the people they needed. When we came to Auschwitz, we had our suitcases packed with clothes and some silver, thinking that maybe we could sell the silver. The capos came. They said, "Leave everything here." I said, "What do you mean? How will we find our things?" They said, "We'll find you. Leave your luggage here." Then they started taking us to the selection. It was daylight. The women went one way, the men another. I stood with my mother, my 2 sisters, and Aunt Eva behind me. And there was Mengele. This I'll never forget. Mengele said to my mother in German, "How old are you?" She replied in perfect German, 46 years old, sir." He sent her one way and me another. My mother's sister, my Aunt Ava, she went to her sister's side, and my two sisters were sent to mine. We never saw our mother or aunt again. We read together. I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented.
Bromide. This narrative is a direct quote from the talk my mother gave to the American liberators in the spring of 1945, in her own words, hence the imperfect English. Upon arrival in Auschwitz-Birkenau, we were unloaded onto a platform lit by strong floodlights. There stood a tall and good-looking German officer, and I suddenly felt him grabbing my shoulder and throwing me to the left, almost causing me to fall. My mother, holding my baby son, remained on the right and disappeared. I tried to return to them and felt only a shock on my head as I was slung back. From this moment, things happened quickly and like in a factory. We went to a building where we had to undress, leave everything we had, and then some girls shaved our hair. We arrived in a shower, and after that, we got some ragged clothes and got a red stripe painted on our back. We could not recognize each other when we met again. 3 weeks followed then, what I can hardly remember. All of us were almost crazy. We slept in barracks where it was raining in, on the naked earth, without blankets, crowded, about 1,200 women in one room. At 3 o'clock in the morning, we were awakened and had to line up immediately. It was a hard climate at this place. In the morning, everything was frozen. By day, hot to suffer. In the morning, at the first sail uppel, we were standing in lines for 3 or 4 hours and were counted over and over again. After that, we sometimes got some drops of coffee or vegetable tea. At 10 o'clock, we had to stand again and got our only meal. I cannot describe what it was. Some raw vegetables in water, cold, little, tasting terribly. The first days, we could not eat it at all. As we heard afterwards, the bad taste came from medicine. Bromide used to tranquilize us so we would not go crazy and make trouble over the loss of our mothers and babies. As a result, we always felt to be half in a dream. When we did not have to stand, we were lying on the ground in the dust, just lying, without speaking or thinking. We read together. Survival is a privilege which entails obligations. I am forever asking myself what I can do for those who have not survived.
My father, Ryan Royberg, was 17 when the Nazis invaded Poland. And he graduated high school and started learning at a teacher's seminary several hours west of the village he lived in Ukraine now, then Poland. My father really never talked about his life, and it's almost the only story I know. There just as the German army was attacking the Russians, they were just on the Russian side of the front. And they begged their father and mother to let them to come with them and retreat with the Russian army. And they, the parents said that the Germans would never, they were more civilized, it would be better than starving with the Russians, and wouldn't let them take his two younger brothers. So my father and his older sister, they ran with the Russians, and they survived along with a few cousins in a Russian labor camp in the Azerbaijan oil fields. His sister Connie soaked in the sugar beet collective. And in 1948, he came to Detroit. Connie never get to Detroit because of immigration quotas, so they settled in Windsor. Recently, I asked my sister Elizabeth if Dad had ever shared any stories with her. She said only once did he volunteer anything. And it was after she'd gone with him to see the movie Titanic. And after the show, he stood standing confused in the parking lot and said, "You know the part with the boat sinking? That's what it was like when I was leaving home. Only without the water." Somehow we got out. People asked us when we went back there how we got out. They didn't care about suffering because everyone suffered. And they were just amazed how did he get out. He came with a German passport. He'd never been to Germany. At 7 years younger than he was, really. He started a new life, but he never really recovered himself. And only recently have I come to realize how much he himself was a lost child of the Holocaust. We read together.
Never shall I forget the beautiful faces of the children, whose eyes I saw turned into wreaths of smoke beneath the silent blue sky. Never shall I forget those flames which consumed my faith forever.
Fatherland. Please find me an ordinary place to live, forgotten, barren, a piece of ground, rocks, a desert, I don't mind if it can be my homeland. A simple fishing village or something tucked inside a mountain where nothing much grows and no one wants to go. Its citizens, common, quiet people, unknown to the outside world. If they accept me as their guest and murmur, "Our house is your house always," let this be my homeland. But first, let them forgive me for my mistake. It has been a curse and a disgrace to have dark eyes and speak a strange language, to be a Jew. But I will praise that country all my days. I will be good to it and work there among its rocks. I will sing, and my blood will warm such a place. Oh, faraway country, still a fantasy to me. I will live for you and die on command if you will first forgive me for my race and let me call you home, wherever you are. We read together, and who will remember the rememberers?
There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light, long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we loved, Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember. יש כוכבים שאורם מגיע ארצה, רק כאשר הם עצמם עבדו ואינם. יש אנשים שזיו זכרם מאיר, כאשר הם עצמם אינם עוד בתוכנו. אורות אלה המבהיקים בחשכת הליל, הם שמראים לאדם את הדרך, את הדרך. שמראים לאדם את הדרך, את הדרך. As we live our days, these are the ways we remember, we remember. As we live our days, these are the ways we remember, we remember, we remember, we remember.
The Wandering Jew. I have never felt nationalistic or patriotic about the countries in which I have lived. Even in Switzerland, my country of birth, I have felt like a stranger. I never learned how to sing their national anthem and always felt silly when this was required. I'm not sure why I did not feel proud or grateful to have been born and lived in one of the most desirable, peaceful, and affluent countries in the world. Perhaps this is because both of my parents, Ruzena and Jacob, who were naturalized Swiss citizens, never felt quite fully integrated. My mother was a survivor of Auschwitz, and my father and his family escaped the pogroms in Kishinev, what is now Moldavia. Our apartment always had the appearance like it was not really lived in. It looked like we could be ready to move at a moment's notice. We could pack up our suitcases quickly and leave. Our apartment was sparsely furnished with second-hand furniture and very few pictures hanging on the walls. My parents remarked that the most valuable asset we could possess was having an education, because if you had to flee, no one could take it away from you. My father, though, made sure that we had gold coins and diamonds in the bank, so we could bribe people to help us escape if, as Jews, we became subject to persecutions again. My embodied sense as a wandering Jew did not diminish as a citizen living here in the US. I still haven't learned how to sing the American national anthem, and I cringe if anybody says that the US is the greatest country in the world, because we have the strongest military and we have great influence in the world. I have become especially distressed about the authoritarian tendencies of our current president. His propensity to ignite hate, spew prejudice, racism, and misogyny through his remarks frightens me. To me, that's a fact that so many members of his administration and a significant portion of the population support him sound like echoes of pre-Nazi Germany and history that may be repeating itself. The German singer and poet Konstantin Wecker suggests in his anti-fascist songs that the mercilessness of our capitalistic system unsettles many people and they feel left behind. I worry that people's increased nationalism emanating from these fears, and like before, this anger is being displaced on Jews and other minorities. Perhaps my aversion to feeling patriotism in any country is a result of my underlying fear of anti-Semitism arising and discrimination at being the other. Konstantin Wecker believes that the rise of nationalism is the beginning of the end. Free men and women don't need the crutches of nationalism. As citizens, we should be actively involved in creating practical solutions to make the country in which we live better. He envisions a rule-free world where humankind sticks together and replaces hate by love and affection towards one another. A utopian dream? Surely, but it is the only way I see to work our way out of this paradigm. It begins by working collaboratively, listening, and speaking out against injustices to us. We cannot be silent. On this Yom HaShoah, I'm willing to make this pledge. We read together. For the dead and the living, we must bear witness.
The best interests of a child. It was March 13th, 1944. The Germans began to perform Kinderaction in the Kovno ghetto. For 2 days, the SS stormed the dwellings, rounding up and killing all the children under the age of 13 that they could find. Tanya, my mother's 3-year-old cousin, lay hidden in a bunker beneath the ground where my parents and several other families lived. The family had already lost Tanya's father, who had been shot in cold blood by a group of Lithuanians known as the White Armbanders within days of Nazi occupation. Fearful that Tanya would be discovered and everyone living in the home killed, the family decided that Tanya needed to be taken out of the ghetto. They turned to my 25-year-old mother, who looked Aryan with her blonde hair and green eyes and spoke German fluently. She agreed that she stood the best chance of smuggling Tanya out of the ghetto and saving her. After sedating Tanya and hiding her in a large satchel, my mother slipped through the barbed wire gates. She left the package at the doorstep of a former housekeeper and safely returned alone that night. In the subsequent week, Tanya's mother was fraught with anxiety, and she begged my mother to go out and find out what happened to her daughter. So again, my mother risked her life and left the ghetto. And when she returned, she brought back a photo showing Tanya safe on a farm with a relative of the housekeeper. 4 months later, My parents were deported to concentration camp when they were caught outside the bunker by the Nazis. My father was sent to Dachau, and my mother and her mother to Stutthof. Tanya's mother, my father's parents, and my father's 22-year-old sister, Rita, after whom I am named, remained in hiding and were subsequently killed when the Germans set fire to the Kovno ghetto. My mother's younger sister, Sarah, had left earlier from the ghetto to fight as a Jewish partisan in the woods. And she went after the war to find Tanya and raised her as her own child in the Soviet Union, along with her own biological daughter. Only in the late 1980s, with my mother's sponsorship, did the whole family immigrate to Canada. Today, Tanya is alive, 70 years old, and lives in Toronto. She's a retired professor of statistics and a grandmother of 2. I was looking in a box of my mother's documents and recently found a series of correspondence typed in English on onion skin paper dated June through October 1947 between my mother and a distant American relative named Milton Edelman. Milton Edelman apparently is a third cousin once removed, lived in Brooklyn, and was a successful businessman, generous in his assistance to Jewish charities. He was interested in adopting Tanya since he and his wife were unable to have children. He located my mother, who at that time after the war was working in Brussels as a director of an orphanage, supporting my father through engineering school. Aside from discussing different potential avenues for smuggling Tanya out of the Soviet Union, he described in detail his educational and material credentials that could help ensure a wonderful life for Tanya. My mother responded that the best way to help her would be to send my Aunt Sarah material support in terms of clothes and medicines and bartering supplies. These could be used in the black market to upgrade their standard of living. She firmly opposed Tanya's removal from her sister's family, given the potential psychological disruption that could be imposed by another separation. In a subsequent letter, Milton seemed somewhat offended by her tone. I don't know whether he continued to offer support once his adoption request was refused. My mother never spoke of this incident to me while alive, and I never knew I had this branch of family relations in the U.S. I am in awe of my mother, not only for her bravery in saving Tanya, but because she understood that having a more privileged life was not a reason to separate a child from the only family she knew, especially given the trauma and loss that Tanya had already experienced. The potential of Tanya's separation reminds me of the heartache occurring today in our country, with immigrant children from Mexico and Central America being separated from their parents, held in detention camps for months on end, and then sent to foster families across the U.S. unknown to them. I'm very grateful to Rabbi Josh for the journey he's undertaken this year. His relentless pursuit to show up and to speak against the outrage occurring for these families and children is a tribute to my mother's memory and all of our ancestors. May we remember on this Yom HaShoah the suffering of the survivors and the 6 million Jews who perished at the hands of the Nazis. May we honor them by never forgetting the immigrant plight, families who just want to be together with their children and create a better future for them. We read together. Religion embraces both faith and action. The primary quality is action, for it lays the foundation of faith. The more we do good, the more readily we grasp the meaning of duty and life, and the more readily do we believe in the divine from which stems the good.
You must hope. My parents, Magda and Louis Goldstein, and their large families, including their niece, my cousin Lola Taubman, lived in a small town in Czechoslovakia, later taken over by Hungary during World War II. My mother and Lola and most of the family were taken to Auschwitz in 1944. My mother and Lola lost their entire immediate families. Only a few of the Goldstein cousins survived. Meanwhile, my father survived a forced labor battalion and a Russian POW camp. My parents were reunited after the war and were able to immigrate to the United States in 1946 because my father had 3 brothers who were already living here. Lola had to stay in a series of displaced person camps in Germany. The following condensed letters were sent by my parents to Lola in the DP camp in Zeilsheim, Germany. Brooklyn, November 6, 1946. Dear Lola, we received your letter of October 25th, and you can imagine how happy we were to read some news. Unfortunately, you still are not writing us about those things what we would wish mostly to know. Why are you not writing exactly if we have to make out a new affidavit, or have you some possibility with the one sent by my uncle? We really are shocked that you couldn't get over here till now, but please, you must hope still. And you will see everything will be all right. I know it is hard for you there, but unfortunately, nothing goes so smoothly as we would wish. We will try to send you a package this week. I hope it won't pass a long time and we will be able to see each other again. Much love and many kisses, Magda. My dear Loli, we received your letter. Write to us more often and exactly what is to do in your interest. If the affidavit from Uncle Maurice isn't good, write at once and we make out a new one. Learn English. It is very important. If you have occasion to learn some trade, so do it. It is very important too. Enclosed, $1. Many regards from Louis. My parents did send Lola several packages to the DP camp. One included camel hair fabric, material for a lining, thread, and buttons to make a coat. Unfortunately, due to immigration quotas, Lola was not able to come to the United States until 4 years after the war ended. In 1949, after a 13-day journey crossing the Atlantic, she arrived in New York Harbor, and she was wearing the camel hair coat. And we have a photo provided by Lola's daughter, my cousin Ruth Taubman, who could not be here tonight. A photo of Lola on the boat arriving in her camel hair coat. And that was 70 years ago. Our sweet Lola had a long and productive life in the United States. She was active in Holocaust education in both Florida and Michigan. We were fortunate to have her as part of our Temple Beth Emeth Generations After group for the last 10 years of her life. She stood up and she spoke out, setting an example for all of us. We read together. In the final analysis, I believe in man in spite of men. I still believe in his or her future in spite of what human beings have done to the principle of human dignity and human life.
Stateless. When my family and I arrived in America in late 1945 and early 1946, we weren't just homeless and penniless, we were stateless. When Hitler came to power in the 1930s, he stripped all German Jews of citizenship. Without citizenship, a person is deprived of all legal rights and protection from any government. It means that there isn't a single country in the world that is compelled to admit or protect you. You are stateless until the individual becomes eligible for citizenship somewhere. A stateless person is extremely vulnerable. My father did everything possible to save our family from the Nazis. He moved us from Germany to Amsterdam, but Amsterdam soon ceased to be a safe place after the Nazi invasion and subsequent occupation. My father wrote to a man in Sweden requesting Ecuadorian passports, thought to be a vehicle for escaping the death camps. It was a miracle that we ever received these passports. Although the passports played a critical role in getting us out of the hell of Bergen-Belsen several months before the war ended, they were invalid for the purpose of finding a homeland and acquiring citizenship. For the Nazi, citizenship was irrelevant. In the concentration camps, we were prisoners. Citizenship, nationality, or statelessness did not make a difference. Only in the context of an anticipated prisoner exchange would certain types of Jews have value for the Nazis because they could be traded. Our Ecuadorian passports made us eligible to be what was called exchange Jews, who could be traded for German citizens or German prisoners in other countries, who could then return to Germany to help win the war. In January of 1945, my parents, my brother, and I, as exchange Jews, were put on a train to Switzerland. Tragically, my father died on the train from malnutrition and brutal beatings. Upon arrival in Switzerland, my mother and my brother were hospitalized immediately, but the Swiss officials deemed me healthy and sent me to a displaced persons camp in Algeria. I was barely 14 years old. The Swiss did even what the Nazis hadn't done. They tore apart my family. In 1945, relatives who had arrived in America just before the war broke out sponsored and welcomed us. They helped us adapt to a new country and a new culture. One of the first steps I took in America was to apply for citizenship. And 5 years later, I became an American citizen. My 15 years of statelessness came to an end. Today, there are an estimated 15 million stateless people all over the world. How many of these individuals will have an opportunity to become citizens somewhere, as I did? And how many will remain among the most vulnerable people for the rest of their lives? Let us hold in our hearts together all the stateless people as we reflect on the plight of all the victims of the Shoah. We read together, "Thou shalt not be a victim, thou shalt not be a perpetrator, but above all, thou shalt not be a bystander."
Circumstances beyond his control. A refugee couple leaves their war-torn homeland and seeks sanctuary at our border. They enter the country legally with their 18-month-old son, and with the help of relatives who'd arrived a few years before, they embark on the difficult work of creating a new life in a foreign land. A year later, immigration knocks on their door. They have come to arrest their now 2-year-old son as an illegal alien. They threaten the child with deportation. The parents are not yet American citizens. Their mastery of the English language, never mind the American legal system, is not secure. They face the imminent prospect of family separation. This story takes place not in 2019, but 70 years ago in 1949. My brother, John, still has his arrest warrant. Our parents' entry visas to the U.S. had expired. They were eligible for political asylum because Poland had fallen to the communists. But my brother was born in Sweden, where our parents had first gained entry after the war. Sweden did not grant birthright citizenship at that time, so my brother, in addition to being an illegal, was deemed officially stateless. Let that sink in. The word deportation had a terrifying connotation, being deported to concentration camp. My parents had already lost everything, family, property, even body parts. Now they faced the prospect of losing their child. Over the next 3 years, my brother was required to make repeated visits from our apartment in Upper Manhattan to the immigration court on Ellis Island. He had to prove that as an undocumented immigrant, he wasn't a danger to our country on the basis of specific types of otherness. Our father had to present him to the McCarthy-era judge and testify on his behalf that John was not a communist, a subversive, or a homosexual. Finally, in December 1952, my father and now 6-year-old brother left behind my mother and their new anchor baby to board a night train to Montreal. They had to stay out of the country for over a month, long enough for John to obtain a visa to re-enter the U.S. Fortunately, we had family in New York and in Montreal. My brother, while stateless, was not alone. How does a stateless person cross an international border? My brother carried an affidavit of identity and nationality that declared his marital status as single and his occupation as student, and that attested that he had lost his nationality of origin through circumstances beyond his control. The personal description of affiant describes my brother as age 6 years, weight 60 pounds, and height 3'6". And it also includes a photograph of an adorable, blameless child. When I asked my brother what he recalled about that time in his life, he replied, "I'd never seen downtown New York at night before, and I was struck by the glittering lights. And when we arrived in Montreal, our cousins gave me a Superman comic book in French." He is not haunted by this story, but I am. What fear our parents must have experienced. More so, I am haunted by the echoes of this story in the present day. We say never forget because the risk of forgetting is that it will all happen again. And yet, it is happening again, right now, right here. Thank God that today we have the power to show up and stand for the children. We are compelled to speak. We read together. If we bear all this suffering, and if there are still Jews left, when it is over, then Jews, instead of being doomed, will be held up as an example.
You shall not wrong a stranger. When the war broke out in Poland, my mother, Minna Adler, and family were forced into slave labor for the Germans. In August of 1942, an edict was issued requiring all Jews to gather in the village square. My mother chose to flee into the countryside, living in the fields for a month, foraging for nourishment. My grandparents and my mother's siblings stayed behind and were slaughtered. My mother found her way to a neighboring village where a family who knew of the Adlers agreed to help her. When the family's granddaughter, Zofia Jamba, was called up by the Nazis to work as a Polish slave laborer in Germany, my mother took her place. From then on, until liberation, in April of 1945, Minna Adler was known as Zofia Jamba. She lived as a Catholic girl with a German family on their farm, forced to do hard labor, but also attending church every Sunday, even taking communion. When the war ended and my 22-year-old mother was released from 6 long years of slave labor, she was too terrified to reveal her true identity. So she stayed where she was, maintaining that she was a displaced Polish Catholic girl. The Russian prisoners of war, who had worked side by side with her on the farm, were also released. They roamed the countryside, often drunk, looting the surrounding homes. Eventually, they came back to the farm where my mother was still living. The host family, fearful for their lives, hid upstairs while my mother answered the door. The Russians asked my mother what she wanted them to do to her German hosts. My mother said nothing, that they had treated her well. She gave the prisoners some milk, and they left. The German family credited her with saving their lives and their farm, and they remained in touch for many years to come. So my mother, who had lost everything and everyone she held dear because of the Nazis' persecution of the Jews, who did not know where she was going or what her future held, was able to refrain from doing the same to others, to refrain from perpetuating hatred and destruction on another just because they belonged to the nationality responsible for her loss. I often wonder whether I would have been as kind or shown the same presence of mind as she did under these same conditions. While I ponder this question for myself, I have also come to realize that my mother's experiences and my family history have instilled in me a strong emotional sensitivity towards discrimination at every level. I deeply feel the divisive impact of what some see as merely partisan politics playing out in our country right now. This is more than being a liberal snowflake. It seems to drill down to my DNA. I am really fearful about rising anti-Semitism, about rising anti-Semitic echoes, and the targeting of hate against Jews and groups labeled as other, blacks, Muslims, immigrants, and the LGBTQ community. I worry about our future, not only as Jews, but as a people. The blame, isolation, and terror that historically were key elements of anti-Semitism, I see now directed toward many. This is occurring both in our country and in countries all over the world. I believe that the only way we can save our humanity is to rise above our differences as Jews, blacks, Muslims, Asians or Hispanics, straights, gay or trans, and be very purposeful in our efforts to get to know each other and our common struggles. Divide and conquer has been a strategy used by those in power for thousands of years. If we are to challenge the resurgence of white supremacy and authoritarianism, we must become allies for one another. We must be present and continue to show up, as we have recently in the Pittsburgh and California synagogue shootings, New England mosque shootings, Pulse nightclub shooting, and Charleston Black church shooting. This is a moral imperative. My mother had no choice in 1939 but to be a slave laborer, to flee and hide her Jewishness to save herself. She was one of the lucky ones who survived. Today, we are reminded that while conditions of oppression and violence evoke echoes of the Shoah, we are not being forced to hide or flee. Rather, we can stand together with other groups who are targeted and show our solidarity and strength in our numbers. If we use our power to speak out, we will withstand the challenge of this time. On this day of Yom HaShoah, I honor my mother as we remember the suffering of the 6 million lives lost. I speak out, we speak out. We read together. I believe in the sun, even when it is not shining. I believe in love, even when feeling it not. I believe in God, even when God is silent.
Please rise.
El male rachamim shochen bamromim hamitzei menucha nechana tachat kanfei hashchina b'malot kedoshim utaharim kizarakim mazhirim et nishmot 6 million achenu v'achyoteinu shenehargu al kiddush Hashem ba'al harachamim yastireim b'siter knafav le'olamim v'tzor b'tzror hachayim et nishmatam Adonai hu nachalatam v'yanuchu ושלום על משכבם, ונאמר Let us read together. Fully compassionate God on high, to our 6 million brothers and sisters murdered because they were Jews, grant clear and certain rest with you in the lofty heights of the sacred and pure, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. Source of mercy, forever enfold them in the embrace of your wings. Secure their souls in eternity. Adonai, they are yours. They will rest in peace. Amen. And we continue together singing Ani Ma'amin. Ani Ma'amin, Ani Ma'amin, Ani
Please remain standing for the Shoah Kaddish. We'll read it all together. Yit Gadal, Auschwitz, Yit Gadash, Łódź, Shemei Rabbah, Ponar, Be'alma Divrach Irute, Babi Yar, Be'amlich Malchute, Maidanek, B'chayechon Uvyomechon, Birkenau, Uvchaye Dechol Beit Yisrael, Pwashuv, Ba'agala Uvizman Kariv, Yanovska, V'imru, Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevorach Leolam Olomei Almaya. Yitbarach V'yishtabach Theresienstadt. V'yit Poar V'yit Ramam Buchenwald. V'yit Naseh V'yit Hadar Treblinka. V'yit Ale V'yit Hala Vilna. Shemei Dekusha Berichu Bergen-Belsen. Le'ela Mauthausen, Min Kol Birchata B'Shirata, Dachau, Tush B'chata B'Nechemata, Skarjisko, Da'amiran B'Alma, Warsaw, V'imru, Amen. Yehei Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya, B'chaim Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael, V'imru, Amen. Oseh Shalom B'Mramav, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru. Amen.
Oseh Shalom B'Mramav, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru. Amen.
Please be seated.
Sorry. I forgot I had one more thing to do. We read responsively, and this prayer is called Names. During this service, we remember the victims of the Shoah.
Those whose names we know.
Those whose names we yearn to know.
Those whose stories we know a little bit about.
Those whose stories we can only imagine.
We honor and remember the 6 million who perished.
And we honor and remember our loved ones who, through heavenly and human miracles, through personal fortitude, were given the chance to live and chose to keep faith in God and in life.
As written in Deuteronomy, see, I have set before you this day life and prosperity, death and adversity. Choose life that you and your descendants may live.
Our mothers and fathers strove to keep the memory of their families and of our entire people alive. They chose life so that we might live.
They ensured that there would be a next generation, and they blessed us by bestowing upon us the crown of the good names of the family they lost.
We and the generations after rejoice in the miracle of life renewed while remembering the lives that came before us. Our mothers and fathers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, may God bless them and protect them and grant them peace.
We pledge ourselves to keep their memories alive, to keep faith in God, to choose life.
Please rise if you are able for the partisan song.
Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst den letzten Weg. Gott schimmeln bleien, verstellen bleie Tag. Kommen wird nach uns ihr ausgebänkte Show. Es wird abruhigt und unser Trott mir seinen da. Kommen wird nach uns ihr ausgebänkte Show. Von Glück abruhigt und unser Trott einen da. Es wird die Morgensonne begegnen uns dem Heind. Und der Nächten wird verschwinden mit dem Feind. Nur euch versammelt wird die Sonne in dem Kajo. Wie a Parol so ging das Lied von dort zu dort. Nur euch versammelt wird die Sonne in dem Kajo. Wie a Parol so ging das Lied von dort zu dort. Das Lied geschrieben ist mit Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht kein Lied von a Vogel auf der Frei. Das hat a Volk zwischen Fallen die gewinnt. Das Lied gesungen mit ner Ganes in die Hand. Das hat a Volk zwischen Fallen die gewinnt. Das Lied gesungen mit ner Ganes in die Hand. Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst den letzten Weg. Gott schimmeln bleien, verstellen bleie Tag. Kommen wird nach unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird abruhigt und unser Trott mir seinen da. Kommen wird nach unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird abruhigt und unser Trott mir seinen da.
Thus ends our service. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you to generations after for creating this beautiful and meaningful and important tribute. Thank you to Kol Halev and Miyun Kim, our guest pianist, for adding music and intention. And thank you for everyone for caring.